Alright guys, welcome. It is Tim's Inner Monologues, number one. We're just going to get straight into it. Basically, why paying taxes is a scam and how the EU system, well, tax system, this sort of false premise that everything is free, doesn't actually make anything for free. I'll get straight into it. We're basically going to cover how taxation keeps you poor and sort of stuck in the system. We'll also cover the lie of three free things like healthcare, medical aid, bills, dental visits, schools, retirement homes, the whole lot, and why that's mainly a fat lie. We're then going to we'll then talk about how the government uses your quote unquote tax money when in reality it just prints and prints and prints and prints, and how it uses your tax money to fund things that you don't want. And then we'll talk about the solution and sort of what my ideal scenario is. Now, I must preface, as you can hear, I am in the UK. I will take this from a UK-EU perspective, but I will also talk about America because both systems have good and bad. But again, both systems are completely corrupt and terrible. Anyway, let's begin. So we'll get straight into it. Why does taxation keep you poor and sort of stuck in the system, and sort of how medieval peasants did better than you? Well, it's pretty simple. Before King Henry VIII got angry and wanted to divorce his wife, the idea of taxation was tithing. This is a religious thing where we would provide 10% of our income to the monastery and to the church. When I mean church, I mean Catholic Church. And medieval peasants, apart from giving the fact they would have to give maybe something to the landowners, this was their main taxation service. They would have to give around 10% to the Catholic Church. Now, what did the monasteries do with this money? Yes, you could argue back in history there was a form of corruption. That's why Henry VIII wanted to destroy the monasteries. But for the most part, the money was used back into the community. It was to help the homeless. It was sort of a social system, one of the first ever welfare states for those that couldn't work, the widows, the pregnant women with no husbands, the children who are homeless, maybe those that had fought in the 5 million wars they had in the Tudors and all the medieval times. But at the end of the day, you were given this money. You know, let's say you earn £1 a year, you were taxed on maybe 10% of that. You were able to keep 90 pence and shillings and whatever else. And not only to mention that, but you had about 150 days of holiday. That's right. You and me work we work harder and we earn less than the medieval peasants do. So I must stress, the peasants had it better than we did. They had it far better than we have. And we here 500 years later, we look back at the medieval sort of historical period as backwards, when in reality they were far ahead of us. And this is what the system wants. So let's then go into the 1900s. We'll get straight into the 1900s. Obviously, you all know about the whole lie of feminism, That's a whole other video for another time. But effectively, why did the Jewish state of the Rothschilds and the banks, why did they give so much money to the feminists to be able to peddle their cause that women should be able to vote and women should be able to work? Is so that they could tax the rest of the population. This didn't end, by the way. It wasn't just that they were taxing it. They wanted to make it impossible, again, another video, for people to live on a one income only household. So they removed the gold standard in 1971, and they basically started printing money like absolutely crazy. So just alone, the US printed 6 to 7 trillion. That's right, not million, not billion, $1 trillion since 2020, mainly in 2020 to 2022. Because again, when they removed the gold standard in 1971, thanks Nixon, it isn't backed by anything. There is nothing backing it. There is no, hey, look, you can't make more unless gold rises in value. Yes, you could argue the petroleum dollar. Yeah, okay, fine. But again, that eventually dries up. And the petroleum dollar is basically a massive psyop anyway. We've had no gold standard since 1971. This is basically all of Western Europe, and any country that does want the gold standard, like Gaddafi, gets killed. The UK alone printed 900 billion, with most of it being electrical money to, you listen to this, to stabilize government debt. And the EU printed $2 trillion, 2 trillion euros, sorry, in March of 2020 onwards. And again, this is mainly, as I can see from Google, this is mainly just buying assets and banknotes drastically increasing by 11%, 1.43 trillion at the end of 2020. And total value of banknotes was 1.6 trillion by the end of 2024. So I guess the sort of idea is, why am I telling you all this? Why is it that the government has printed trillions upon trillions upon trillions of euros, pounds, and dollars, yet they really want your £4,000 or £5,000 you make in tax a year? And it's because they want to keep you stuck in the system. That's just the harsh truth. The value of every single currency is basically collapsed. The dollar is weaker than it ever was. Gold is at an all-time high. Silver is at an all-time high. The S&P 500, the Nasdaq, they're all at all-time highs. The reason is the dollar, the euro, and the pound is basically worth nothing. It is like child's play. And my question to many of you who always say this idea of, oh, well, the money goes back into the economy. No, it doesn't. Why would the UK and every single government need your money if they can just print trillions and trillions more of it? That's just, and just weakens and weakens and weakens and weakens and weakens the currency that you have, which means your purchasing power collapses. For example, £500. I'll give you a great example. The shopping I used to do in central London back in 2022, I used to spend anywhere between £50 to £60 a week on food. And this was me bulking. I was bulking in Aldi. I was eating 4,000 calories plus a day. If I went again into Aldi to do that exact same shopping, I would probably be looking at anywhere between £80 to £100 a month on the food I was eating 3 years ago-ish. Again, why do they do this? Why do this? It's to keep you basically complacent. You will have no savings, right? You get taxed, let's say 30% of your income. You then have to pay bills, mortgage, rent, accessories, bills, etc. That's maybe, let's say, 30 to 40% of your income. Now you have, let's say, worst case scenario, 30% left. And then you then have to pay for things. Well, sorry, rent and mortgage is 30%, and then the rest of your bills is another 20 to 30%. So you have no money, no emergency savings, no nothing, and you are effectively poor and stuck to the system. This is it. Taxation just keeps you poor. The government don't need your money. They really don't. They don't need your £5,000 or £6,000. But at the end of the day, who cares? So there was a tweet. The reason why I'm doing this, I'll pop the tweet up on here. This guy basically starts talking about how it's such a good thing to be in the UK, how it's such a good thing to be in Amsterdam. Why would you want to be in Amsterdam? It's a shithole. But anyway, how Amsterdam is the quote-unquote peak of society for tech guys. Why would you want to be ever, and I'm just pulling up Twitter now actually. Why would you want to, yeah, I still call it Twitter, I don't call it X. Why would you want to be in Twitter? Why would you want to be in America when you have the quote-unquote dream life in America, right? You know, my friend works in Amsterdam. He makes a top 1% income, which is 58,000 euros. That gets taxed to oblivion, by the way. Here's, if you guys can have a look right here. This guy says here, he pays 50% income tax, 21% sales tax, wealth tax, and death tax. I then commented saying that he's 70% taxed on his income, meaning he's making less than a coffee barista. What's the point of making 60,000 euros when you're taxed 70% of it? Not to mention all the food and stuff. And does the government really care about your 70%? Do they really care? No. But they like the fact that you can't afford anything, right? It's the whole WEF, you will own nothing and be happy. So that's my first point. This comes into my second point, again, with the whole European Union. Again, this is more common with the EU rather than America and other countries. but it's because the EU has this idea of free healthcare. Now, again, I must stress, both systems are bad, and both systems have their flaws. And when I was younger, I also believed that my healthcare was free, quote unquote, because I was young and naive and I didn't pay taxes. But now I pay taxes, and it rapes me. It literally rapes me. I feel like I'm being raped by the government every single time I pay tax. So we'll get straight into it. The lie of three things. Nothing in life is free, and if it is free, you are the product. Why do you think TikTok and Instagram and social media is all free? Again, that's another video. Because you are the product. In the same way, your healthcare, your medical bills, your daycare is not free. I then said medical daycare is all heavily subsidized by your taxes, right? So a perfect example is this: the US doesn't have this free healthcare. They don't have free healthcare. They don't have free daycare. You have to pay for it. The top rate in taxes in America, assuming you are the highest earner, is 37%. That was what I had a quick look at Google, right? In the EU, it is 50% plus, with Austria giving 55%. That's just taxed on your income. So already, let's take Austria versus America. You're already paying 18% on top. Not only are you paying that, you're also paying an EU VAT, value added tax, which is 20% on anything you pay for, by the way, apart from maybe the one or two odd things. Yes, the US has a sales tax, but it is significantly lower than EU. The EU VAT, value added tax, is a fat scam. Again, it's another taxation on you that you have to pay for. It's not the people that pay for it, it's you that pay for it. You pay that extra 20% on top of the food, the water, the billing, your car. Everything that you pay for is on that. And on average, the EU citizens pay anywhere between 5 to 13% more in social contributions. So effectively, at the worst case scenario, you're being taxed 50% of your income, plus 20% on anything you pay for, plus 13% in social contributions, more than America, just so that you can get healthcare, which is stolen by an immigrant, Abdul Mohammed, and he steals your money. He tries to rape your daughter, and at the end of the day, when you try to beat him up, he gets put in the hospital and he gets advantage over you. Why? Because he's an illegal immigrant and, immigration, right? And this is just the truth. The EU system is collapsing. The healthcare system is beyond a joke. The NHS, our National Health Service, is beyond a joke. We spend more money on the NHS every single year, and the NHS gets worse and worse and worse. And nobody wants to talk about the big brown picture that people scream and scream and scream about all the time. The NHS is collapsing, the system is collapsing, and because we get quote unquote free healthcare, I'm still spending hours and hours and hours waiting to be told to be let in. So I'll give you a great example. My brother, again, I must stress, the US has its own medical problems. Yeah, you go there, you break an arm, you're now crippling in debt and you have to pay bankruptcy. Okay, whatever. But again, I'm not trying to compare healthcare systems. I was watching a video by Jimmy Talks, and he was talking about the US medical insurance and how that's also a big fat scam. And I was actually quite taken back by this. I didn't know it was that bad. But again, I'm not comparing systems here. I'm just comparing the lie that everything is free in the European Union. It's not. You're subsidized by taxes of it. So, for example, my brother wanted to get a nose surgery because he has struggled breathing. Turns out it's sleep apnea. And he wanted to get surgery to basically repair the nose. They would have to take out bone, the cartilage, or whatever it was. I think it took him 3 or 4 years him to finally get that surgery, despite him not being able to breathe properly and him struggling to sleep for hours and hours and hours on end. And this has been happening for years. No, does the NHS care? No. So what do? They just give him years. Oh yeah, we'll give you an appointment in 1.5 years. Sorry, it's the least we can do. Whilst, Abdul Mohammed comes on a boat and he's able to get free healthcare because he cut himself whilst trying to stab your daughter to death. Happens, right? So this again is the biggest fat scam that the EU has, that everything is free. In the UK alone, we pay road tax, effectively car tax as well. It's basically the same thing. We pay for our insurance, which also is heavily subsidized, is heavily taxed on. For example, my little tiny Suzuki Swift cost me £1,100. I pay £1,800 insurance. So I pay more for the insurance than for the car. Now, if I don't run insurance on a car, I go to jail for like 5 years. It's not ideal, but what can you do? We then pay for TV tax. Yes, it's true. We have to watch. We are taxed on the TV we watch. Thankfully, we don't watch TV, so it doesn't matter for us. You then have VAT, like I said. Petrol, again, petrol, gas, whatever you want to call it. 70% of that is taxed. Who has to pay it? We do. For example, during the whole COVID scenario, the government came out and basically said, hey, there's going to be there's a delay shipment in gas, don't worry. Everyone started panicking because, sheep mindset. And petrol stations were able to ramp it up to the point where people were paying £2 plus a litre. Now, the UK came out and said, oh yeah, we'll get rid of 5p of tax. So instead of paying, let's say £2, you would pay £1.95 on tax. And then the petrol stations just up the price and continue to up the price anyway. Didn't matter, right? If there is demand and there is limited supply, they're going to up the price. This is basic economics. We pay 70% of the total fuel cost in tax. We pay for it all. We pay the fuel duty. So let's say it's £1.35, which is as of yesterday. We pay 55p of that in fuel tax, and then extra 20% on top, and then the last 30% is the petrol station's profits. So 70% of that is paid through us, for us, and we basically get insta-raped. We then pay inflated prices on food, which is taxed by VAT. We pay council tax for our houses, landowner tax, stamp tax if you want to buy the house. And then we also pay capital gains tax, not to mention income tax as well. So let's say your savings did really, really well this year, or your investment, you're going to pay another 20%. So at the end of the day, it keeps you poor, and all this money is quote unquote forgotten by the majority of EU retards. And then we're saying, oh yeah, we have free daycare. Like this guy, oh, he leaves work at 4:15. Kids walk home from free daycare a few minutes later. He never has to worry about medical bills. Yeah, because he's paying 25% more tax. Of course, you don't have to worry about it if you're getting raped on tax. Anyway, this comes into our third point. This video is already 17 minutes long. Government uses your money on things you don't want. So, outside the fact we've already established, the government prints money, uses money, basically rapes you for taxes to keep you in the system. And the idea that all the money that you pay goes towards free things like your healthcare or the road. Again, if anyone comes at me and says, oh yeah, the government uses our money to fix the road, I would like to point out the 50 million potholes that I go by almost daily. And I would go, yeah, look, I personally would fill that. But anyway, the government uses your money on things you don't want. For example, do you want to fund abortions? Well, I'm a Catholic. I don't like abortions. I think it's an abhorrent act. Again, another video for another time. I don't want my taxes to fund abortion. Well, if I don't pay my taxes, I go to jail and yada, 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 right? I don't want there to be a war in the Middle East. Well, that's not my problem. I have to pay my taxes. My taxes get sent to Israel or to Ukraine. Millions and millions and millions of people die or get, have to get rehomed. I don't want my children to learn about homosexuality in school. Well, that's not my problem. I pay taxes. So that money goes towards eventually funding a charity, which eventually then goes for drag queen story time for 5-year-olds. All funded by a NGO that the government definitely doesn't pay for. So at the end of the day, even if you were paying so much tax, you had a physical say on what you wanted the government to do, doesn't matter. You're still getting taxed. For example, why didn't we have a national vote on sending money to Ukraine? I didn't want to send money to Ukraine. I don't want to send money to Israel. I don't want to send money to drag queen things. I don't want to send money to hospitals with abortion. Do we ever get a say in where our money goes? Absolutely not. Is that our money gets shipped over to Israel, which by the way has had over $300 billion, America alone, from the United States since its creation in 1948. Money in Ukraine as well. The UK sends a lot of money to Ukraine every single year. Did I have a say in that? No, I did not. So again, even if you pay your taxes and you think it goes in the system and it's good, does the UK care, the EU, or America? No. It goes towards things you don't want. Our money in the UK goes to illegal immigrants who get housing, healthcare, subsidized. They get money from the government through benefits, and we the taxpayers have to pay it all whilst they stab our sons and rape our daughters. So that's fantastic. So I guess this comes into our last point. Well, Tim, you've bitched about it for over 20 minutes now. What is our solution? What's the solution? What can we do? What would my dream scenario look like if I was the prime minister? Again, I wouldn't. I'd probably be assassinated, but hey ho. This is the truth, right? Taxation will always, always, always be here. I would argue it defrauds a man of his labor. It defrauds a man of his wages. The reality is this. I personally, there is a solution to this. Depending on where you live, US, EU, UK, again, I'm not an accountant. These are not financial advices. This is what I would do. I would find a way to avoid paying as much taxes as possible. This is not evading. Evading is illegal. You go to jail for evading. But there are ways that you can avoid taxes, like tax write-offs and stuff like that. Again, don't do tax fraud. You go to jail. This is not legal advice or financial advice. But try and find a way to avoid paying as much taxes as possible. In the UK alone, we have things that are tax-free, like ISAs, retirement funds, JISAs for children. If you get married, you get an increase of capital gains tax. Find ways to avoid paying as much tax as possible. Because at the end of the day, the money comes back to you, it doesn't go back to the government. So that's number one. Unfortunately, it's never really going to change at the top. This is just how they've always wanted it to be, and it will only and only get worse. So your number two option is, if you can, I would move to a place which has lower taxes. Find a way to pay lower taxes. If you need to set up a trust in another company, another country, or you need to move to Bulgaria or Romania or whatever, find a way to pay the least amount of tax possible. The less, the better. And then obviously, that's sort of the quote unquote solution. Now, what would the dream scenario be? That we never ever pay taxes, but let's be realistic, that's just not going to happen. If I had a dream scenario of the UK, it would be really, really easy. The UK constantly complain, and Reeves, our Chancellor, fantastic woman, if you can't hear, I'm already sarcastic. She says, as you can see here, that we have a debt hole of, I think, 26 billion, I think. And apparently now we, the people of the United Kingdom who work, have to pay that. So what we can do by not paying this is we can stop importing thousands and thousands of illegals. That will save us quite a lot of money. We can stop sending money to Ukraine into foreign nationals. We can stop moving all of our money everywhere and keep it in our own country. And already that's basically saved the 26 billion that we need to do. Stop importing loads of immigrants, deport all of them, which, yeah, by the way, it'll cost a little bit to deport them, okay. But because they put such a strain on our economy, here's how much we're saving per year. Stop sending money to foreign countries that don't need it, and do a massive budget overview on how much money we're actually sending. Really funny, the US, I think it was Major MTG, she put out a bill that says that they wanted to fund a government body in Ukraine to track the spending, and it got voted like 435 to 1. She was the only person that voted for it, I believe. Again, the whole taxation is a big fat scam, and at the end of the day, they are there to keep you poor. The dream scenario would be to stop sending money to international people, stop sending money to immigrants, stop giving money away. Look how much money is lost every single year on social security scams, so government benefits, the welfare system. Cut back on the majority of the stuff that isn't needed. We don't want digital ID because again, digital ID is going to cost us. I think it's 10 billion if I remember correctly. That's 10 billion saved that you don't have to spend. And at the end of the day, it's a basic standard point. We can save so much money, but we're choosing not to by giving it all away. And then us, the taxpayer, the citizen of the UK, the EU, the US, are the ones that are fronting for the money. So I'll leave you with this. God bless you all and enjoy. This will be more of a regular thing as I have so many video ideas. Again, if you enjoy this sort of content, put a like. And yeah, this is sort of the whole entire taxation and why taxation is a big scam. Anyway, talk to you later. God bless.